Well, I missed out on a dessert bar last night. There was one thing I noticed when I was in the room that I really wanted to try, but by the time I got over the table, they were all gone. The people in line had these tall cups, and it looked like this gooey, good mix of things. It looked a little bit like what pecan pie in a cup might look like, but I really had no idea what it was. We were at TESAM, the Turkish American Society of Missouri, our Muslim friends, with our Jewish friends from Sheremet up the street. We talked a little bit about the trivet already today. We were having one of our coffee houses where some people use their skills and gifts. Some of us did a couple skits that maybe didn't work out exactly the way we had planned, but there was music and poetry and singing, and it was a beautiful night. The dessert I missed out on, I found out a little bit more about later. It's called ashur in Turkish. It's Noah's pudding. Have any of you ever had Noah's pudding? Well, a few of you that were there last night, right? So it's thought to be the oldest dessert in the world, first made by Noah after the ark landed on dry land. So they were scurrying around because when they landed, they wanted to have a celebration. They didn't have a lot of food left. They were on the boat longer than they had anticipated, 40 days and 40 nights. And so they scrounged up what they had, and they ended up making this dessert, this sweet thing that includes barley, rice, kidney beans, chickpeas, dried fruits and nuts, a little bit of sugar and honey, kind of all blended together. Some people would imagine all those things mixed together and say, no, thank you. Others would say, I'd love to try that, not only because of the story, but because of how all those things might come together to be something beautiful, this sweet porridge that has a backstory to it. Well, this weekend, our Turkish Muslim friends celebrated a holiday called Ashura, and Ashura is a remembrance of the Red Sea parting and a remembrance of Noah's Ark finally landing on safe land. And so it was a great opportunity to gather together to think about the miracles of God, including the miracle of friendship that can bring us all together, that fall into line with God's dream of beloved community, of people focusing on peace, of recognizing difference, celebrating unity, and belonging to each other. And so again, some people might rush to try that kind of a dessert, and some people might decide not to, because we think differently, because our senses respond to things in our context differently. And because we have autonomy, and because we have covenant, it's important for us when we experience something that we don't like, knowing that other people do like it, to maybe have a conversation and figure out, what is it about this that you like and understand and appreciate? Because I'm not there, but I would like to understand. I would like to be in relationship and in conversation with you. There's so many things that happen in and through the church every week that I wish our worship experience was longer so that we could debrief some of the things that happen and then think together about what that could mean. What does it mean that you have experienced something that others don't appreciate or even noticed? What might it mean to share in storytelling with one another, to know that we don't know, to explore some of the new things that you experienced or heard or felt or thought, some new aha moments that you had during the week, because we're all in this together. So a few things that happened this week that I just want to mention to you. Yesterday, some of us were on the ALS walk in Forest Park as we remembered Kenton and Steve and that horrible disease of ALS. It was mixed emotions because there was a great deal of grief there, but also some circles of friendship and family supporting each other, allowing each other to lean on each other and lean into the possibilities that come when we see each other, when we walk with each other, when we are places where people can lean and where people can cry, where people can express some of the things that were in Psalm 13 this morning, and they know that they're not alone. And we lament the fact that so much research is not happening right now in the United States. So there's a lot to think about, a lot to talk about as we remember the things that have happened this week. Someone in the congregation who is older reached out to someone much younger. They haven't seen them in a long time, and this beautiful relationship is happening. People have gone to coffee with each other, had lunch together, made phone calls, provided transportation for each other within this community. Those things happen every single week. It's some of the fiber that weaves us together. We've been engaged this week in our youth mission trip planning because we believe that we need to teach our children and teenagers to lead a life of service. And so we have the mission trip week coming up. We had a tour of the building with the Young Men's Service League. That's moms and teens in St. Louis that get together to do some service and do some encouraging of each other, finding ways to build memories together and finding ways to serve the world. We went to Sheremetz, our friends at the Reformed Synagogue up the street, for a program called The More You Know. We co-sponsored that with some academics who were talking about the ballot in August. If you want to know how to vote in August on the ballot initiatives and amendments, there are people in this room that would scream, running, come right up to the mic to tell you. But we can't vote unless we know what is being asked of us. We can't vote unless we understand what's going on. And so that was an interfaith opportunity for us to learn about who we are as a people, what our dreams and hopes are, what our faith tells us to be about, and then how to put that into action. There was a conversation I had with Riz Ahmed, who is a Muslim gentleman who runs an organization that feeds people who are unhoused in St. Louis every single day of the year on a Saturday every week, no matter what the weather is. He and his group are out there. We had a member of the congregation, a Girl Scout, who was looking to do a project sort of like the Boy Scouts Eagle Project, and she wanted to work with unhoused people and know a little bit more about what happens in St. Louis. And so this connection was made with Riz Ahmed and our young adult who is moving in this direction of thinking differently and thinking wider and deeper. That happened because of this congregation. And then because it's Pride Month, a lot of things have happened this week. How about these flowers from Greg Schmalig? You want to come up and take a look at them later? We got the Roy G. Biv circle going with that rainbow with those colors. And it's Pride weekend in St. Louis. And on Monday night here, we had Ben Green. Some of you remember Ben Green from a speaker series a while ago. Trans person who is filled with joy and filled with encouragement on how to belong to each other, how to share our stories, how to create sacred space together, and how to multiply joy and lessen pain. Some of us went to see The Dads, a film about dads of trans children. So our youth went to see a history book and talk at the Holocaust Museum on Thursday night called Pink Triangles. And it talked about the pink triangles in Nazi Germany and how that unfortunate, horrible situation has been reclaimed by some LGBTQ plus folk and take over that pink triangle and use that as a source of pride as opposed to a source of devastation. We did some power builder training the last few days here with Promo. That's the agency in Missouri that speaks to legislators and helps us to be equipped so that we go speak to people who are in power and make decisions on our behalf. We had the ACLU part of that, the Human Rights Campaign part of that, PFLAG part of that, a great stirring up of energy and support and encouragement. Some of you were at Pride Fest downtown. Some of us are unfortunately going later this afternoon when it's going to be a little toasty. But being at Pride to share the story that all are welcome, all are loved, all are embraced. Earlier this week, I had an Interfaith Partnership Cabinet meeting, and after our business, we had a speaker from SLU in sociology, and he talked about demography, the demographics of St. Louis. We are not in a good place. Some of you maybe have done some of that reading about the death rates and the birth rates, and what's happening to us that isn't necessarily happening to other big cities across the country. But one of the quotes that he shared has been needling and noodling in my mind, and it was this: the fundamental principle of demography is that demographic transitions are an inevitable aspect of change, persisting irrespective of whether individuals recognize, acknowledge, or accept the underlying demographic realities and trends. So I love that idea that there are things happening, real things happening that are science and statistically shown that we maybe don't recognize or acknowledge or accept. It doesn't matter because they're happening. Science, studies, data show things, and sometimes we decide we're not going to recognize that, not acknowledge that, not accept it. It doesn't mean that it's not happening. So that's just a few of the things that happened this week in and through, because on behalf of this congregation. So let's get to our readings for today. A cup of cold water. You heard about the cup of cold water in the gospel lesson that's talking about welcome. And when I look at a cup of cold water, sometimes, I think this week in particular, we're going to be desperate for cups of cold water. Some people need you to bring them cups of cold water. Other times, cold water can be harsh because it can be shocking. If you were to drink this when you were really hot, it would feel good. You would feel some relief, some refreshment. If someone threw cold water on you, you would probably be shocked. You might be disturbed. You might be interrupted. You might feel like things are not going your way. Two of the same things in a different context, in a different moment, might feel very, very different to you, refreshed or shocking. So the other day, I mentioned that we had this power-building opportunity with folks who were here to learn about how to tell their story so that they could go door to door canvassing, so that they could tell their story to people who don't know stories such as those. And as the folks were gathered here, I was out on my way back, and I got 3 different texts from participants saying, "The police are looking for you." Not something new, to be honest. But what happened was we were gathering LGBTQ folks for this training and allies, and so when police show up in community with people who have been mistreated by police, they are very uncomfortable. So when you hear the word police, you might feel warm, you might feel safe, you might feel encouraged. Other people, maybe some of you, don't feel so safe. You find that that is a threat to you. You have not experienced the police as seeking your security, your safety. And if you see some things in the media, that may add or subtract from the ways that you experience the police. And so we had to kind of work through that with some of the people who were here, thinking that we had police here while they were having their 3 days of training. A sanctuary can be a safe place for people. You're here, so this must be a safe place for you. Some people come into a sanctuary or hear about churches and are not warmed and refreshed. Instead, they feel like they have been mistreated. Wounds open up if they are ever pulled into a sanctuary. Some people that go to a wedding in a sanctuary, go to a funeral in a sanctuary, don't want to be there because of their past experiences of sanctuaries. We don't necessarily feel that way, but you might have some stories or some trauma, or you might know people that do, about the difficulties that can be in a sanctuary, or you may walk into this space and immediately feel at home. You immediately feel warm. You're drawn to the colors, you're drawn to the wood, you're drawn to the light, you're drawn to each other, and you feel safe, and you feel whole, and you feel encouraged, and you feel that you belong. Stories of immigration. Some people see immigration as threats. You've heard a lot this week about Haitians and Syrians and whether or not stepping on U.S. soil means that you're here, or if before you step on the soil, you can be pulled away. You heard about our Vacation Bible Summer and how our kids are thinking about immigration and about refugees and about what the scriptures tell us about belonging. You heard about welcoming from the gospel lesson. If you welcome people, it's like you're welcoming God. When you welcome people, it's like you're welcoming Jesus. And so there's great conversations to be had about what we think, what we believe when we see something, one side or the other, one idea, one feeling, one emotion, questions that come, conversations that must happen when people see things and experience things and feel things differently. So the gospel lesson talks about welcome. The psalm today is talking about the pain that someone feels, but also the realization that God is with them in the midst of all of it. And this dreaded story that many people don't want to hear about Abraham and Isaac, about Abraham the father hearing God's message to sacrifice Isaac. We could spend a lot of time talking about this story. One of the things that people see when they hear and read this story is that God's character is inflicting pain, and that God asks us to do things that are against what we want to do. Other people look at this story and see where Abraham, at the end, heard the voice of God through a messenger saying to get the ram out of the thicket or the underbrush, not to sacrifice or harm the son, but instead to use the animal sacrifice. And so some people say God finds a way out of no way. God gives us choices and possibilities and opportunities, that God doesn't leave us in the midst of challenge alone. Others will say, but God put that challenge forth to Abraham. So different ways to look at the same story, different outcomes, different experiences, different ways to understand or to grapple for understanding, and the call to encourage each other and to be more and more available to working it out, figuring out, having conversations, finding ways to make meaning and purpose. One of the things that stays with me about this story is that 3 times we hear someone say, I'm here. 3 times in that short story, someone says, I'm here. To me, that is what I pull from the story, remembering that God promises us that we will never be alone. God came into the world as Jesus. One of Jesus' names is Emmanuel. Emmanuel means God with us. The idea of not being alone. I'm here, God whispers, God shouts, God reminds us, and God asks us to be present to each other in the midst of whatever story or experience or challenge or disagreement we might be in the midst of. Please pray with us. Holy One, we're grateful not only for the scriptures, but for cups of cold water. Sometimes we experience them as refreshing, and sometimes we experience them as shocking. And so help us in all of our experiences to slow down, to pay attention, to listen deeply, to wonder alone and together what it is that you're doing, how you're weaving it together, how you're challenging us, how you're unleashing us, how you're guiding us, how you're prodding us, how you're inviting us to be more intentional about the ways that we live, about the things that we say, about the things that we do, about the things we don't say, the things that we don't do. God, encourage us to be rooted and grounded in your grace. Help us to make room for the Holy Spirit. Help us to order ourselves so that we can be more like Jesus in the ways that we live each and every day throughout each week. Bless us and encourage us. Guide us into deeper love. Amen.